Hey everybody, welcome back to more Political Excess. Today, let's take a look at the U.S. Senate election in South Carolina. I know it's not going to be a very competitive race. There's not as much to look at, but let's get into it anyway. Let's start on Ballotpedia and get a little bit of background. Incumbent Republican Tim Scott, he is running for re-election. He was appointed to this seat in 2013. He won a special election in 2014, and he won a full term in 2016. His Democratic opponent is Krystle Matthews, and she serves in the South Carolina House of Representatives. 6 years ago, Tim Scott won his race with over 60% of the vote. It was about a 24-point margin, so not very close at all. He's definitely expected to win, but let's jump back for a second and take a look at the primaries. Tim Scott was unopposed in his primary, obviously, and the Democrats, they did have a competitive primary. There's actually a very close three-way race with three candidates getting between 32 and 35% of the vote. So South Carolina does have runoffs. So Krystle Matthews took on Catherine Fleming Bruce in the runoff, and she won with 56% of the vote. If we go down here to campaign finance to take a look at the money, we can see that Tim Scott actually has some, and the Democratic opponents, they have almost nothing. That is from June 30th. But as I said, the money's not coming into this race. Tim Scott is heavily favored. And we can go down here to see how this race is rated, and this pretty much confirms it. Cook Political Report, Insider Elections, and Sabato's Crystal Ball, they all have it as safe or solid Republican. That's also my rating. This is basically a certainty to be over 10 points of a win for Tim Scott, and I would actually think it's likely to be over 20 points at this point. So we can go down here and take a look at the county voting trends on a presidential level, and we can see that 71.8% of the population lives in solid Republican counties. Those are counties that voted for the Republican in the last three presidential elections. Only 23.6% of the population lives in counties that are the opposite and voted for the Democrat in the last three elections. There's not many counties that are trending one way or the other, but Republicans have 4 or 5% that are trending in the direction. So it is a fairly red state, and just because these counties voted red on a presidential level doesn't mean they can't vote in a different direction for Senate or any other office, and it doesn't mean there's not a lot of blue vote in some of these deep red counties, and there's also some red vote in these deep blue counties. But South Carolina is a polarized state. They do have some blue vote out there, so it's not as red as some of the deepest red states. The most populous county is Greenville County, and that went big for Donald Trump last time. Maybe it's trending a little bit toward the left. Some of these other blue counties that have a lot of population in them, such as Charleston, they also might be trending just a little bit to the left. If we want to compare these presidential margins to Tim Scott's victory 6 years ago, let's look at that most populous county, Greenville. It went for Trump about 58-40. 6 years ago, it went for Tim Scott 67-30. So on a national level, it's going to vote bluer, but in an election like for U.S. Senate, so far, as of last time, it voted much redder. So let's check out YouTube and see if they have anything on their channels. And I believe this is Tim Scott's channel. He does have more than one, but there's not much on here. He's got something from a few weeks ago about Afghanistan. Most of his clips are Fox News appearances or him in the Senate. I think he feels he doesn't really need to campaign that much. He has a massive lead. Probably doesn't want to waste his time focusing on this race too much. As for Krystle Matthews, this is all I could find for a channel. Maybe I missed something else, but this appears to be it. This is pretty weak. There's hardly anything on here. So will there be any debates? I don't know. I couldn't find anything as of yet. 6 years ago, there was a debate. I'd hope to see one this year. Regardless of how big of a lead there is, I could see Tim Scott ducking out of a debate, but in principle, I'm always for the debates. So here's a news article about Krystle Matthews, where South Carolina Democrats actually call on her to quit the race. Krystle Matthews, who is black, she was caught on video making some disparaging, racially charged remarks against white voters. I don't think it's going to change a whole lot. She'll probably lose a few more points. But these kinds of remarks, I just want to see consistency in both directions. Feel free to look it up, take a look at it if you'd like. But let's move on to Wikipedia. We've got endorsements here for Tim Scott. I don't see any for Krystle Matthews. If we go down to the polling, there's only two. Only one of them is really kind of recent. Tim Scott is ahead 54 to 37, but I don't think Tim Scott is in any danger whatsoever of even winning this by less than 10 points. If we go back 6 years ago and compare those polls, there's not that many either because this race back then was not expected to be competitive. SurveyMonkey put out a bunch of polls at the end, showed Tim Scott in the high 50s, Thomas Dixon in the high 30s. Tim Scott won with over 60% of the vote, and Dixon got just under 37%. So the polls were not perfect, but close enough. And there's actually no predicted market for this race. I don't think anybody really wants to bet on this at all. Everybody knows Tim Scott is going to win. So there's really nothing at stake. This is a safe Republican seat. This might be Tim Scott's last run. He might retire after this. I know Democrats would love to take him out. I know having a black Republican in the Senate does not sit well with them at all. It's the kind of thing that kind of goes under the radar with all this identity politics. I'm not a fan of it, but it is what it is, and that is a deep dive into the South Carolina U.S. Senate election. Let me know in the comments down below. What do you think about this race? Did I miss anything? Could Tim Scott lose by under a 20-point margin? And if you enjoy this content, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.